Welcome back. The premise of the video that we're going to consider today is based solidly on the fact that there are many individuals who feel that misogyny or the hatred and prejudice against women needs to be tackled, and it needs to be tackled firmly. Now, as an advocate for balance, as an advocate for respect for an individual, regardless of what their gender may be, what the differences in ethnicity may be, whatever difficulty that you can come up with to cause a separation between us as humans, I am for balance. I'm for unity. I'm for peace. But I think that in the pursuit of equality, as will be mentioned in the video, there are some things that are blaringly contradictory. Because now, if it is the plight of one gender to have to undergo difficulties like violence, then why is there an assumption that the counterpart to that particular gender doesn't undergo the same treatment? Why is it that there seems to be a bit of bias? Well, maybe I might be exaggerating just a little bit, but as we get into the video, you'll see whether or not the views that I have correlate with what's seen in the video. So let's get into the video and find out.
Next, a former women's minister has told this programme she supports changing the law so that misogyny is counted as a hate crime. Jo Swinson, who's the deputy leader of the Liberal Democrats, says she's going to work towards widening the hate crime definition so that misogyny, which is defined as a hatred or prejudice towards women, is included. There are currently 5 types of hate crimes legally recognised by all police forces. They are disability, gender, race or ethnicity, religion, and sexual orientation. So do you think misogyny should be added to that list?
Let's pause just for a second. So those are the classifications of individuals or cases that fall into hate crimes. Those different categories, I should say. And if you notice, for the majority of those categories, they have to do with things that are beyond the control of any human being. Your gender, your ethnicity, things of that sort. You cannot be discriminated against, or acts of violence cannot be perpetrated against an individual or a group of individuals based on those things. It's ridiculous because a person can't choose what ethnicity or what gender they are. They can't choose that. This is what's given to them at birth. And so naturally, if an individual encounters violence on behalf of their ethnicity or their gender, then there should be protections here. But are we talking about something when we say misandry, the hatred and prejudice against women? Are we talking about something that is the view of the overwhelming majority of men? Is that the case? I don't think so, but let's keep going.
Jo Swinson then, Deputy Leader of the Lib Dems, as I said, and former Minister for Women and Equalities. We can also speak to Paul Giannassi, who is from the National Police Chiefs Council and oversees hate crime. Sam Smethers is Chief Executive of the Fawcett Society, which campaigns for gender equality and women's rights. And we were also due to speak to a campaigner who was opposed to misogyny being part of hate crime, but she has decided not to join us after all. Not to worry. Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. OK, so what do you want to see change and why?
Well, at the moment, as you say, there's 5 types of hate crime, but that doesn't include gender and misogyny. It's gender identity, so trans people are covered, but hate crime that is directed at you because you happen to be a woman. And there are many crimes that are exacerbated and directed at women just for going about their daily business. For schoolgirls walking to school, getting leered at, getting shouted at, that kind of harassment is happening on an everyday basis. And we've seen some of that being called out with the campaigns like Me Too. But we also know, I mean, you know, all of us women on the panel here, we've all experienced it. The women working this programme, the women watching at home, most women have experienced some kind of harassment in their daily life at some point. And it's about saying, this this is not acceptable. This is not okay. Many of these things might be crimes anyway, but actually, do people report it? Do people feel that they'll be treated or dismissed, treated as if they're being silly? And what we've seen actually is there's 3 police forces in England that have started to count hate crimes, including misogyny. It was started in Nottinghamshire, now North Yorkshire, and even in Somerset have done so as well. And I think it's time that that's extended more widely across the board.
So Ms. Swinson makes a point here that I want to stop and address. So whose responsibility is it to deal with misogyny, or to report it, I should say? Is it the responsibility of the police in the local area, or is it the responsibility of the victims of misogyny? And so if an individual feels that the attempt to go and talk to the proper authorities and report that these issues are happening to them specifically, if they feel that it won't be taken seriously, then is it the fault of the police, or is it the fault of the individual who's making the claim? Because now, if these activities are already written in stone in the law, and if these activities have already been deemed to be criminal, then what would be the use in making these into hate crimes? So are we saying, and I'm gonna try my best not to be disingenuous, but are we saying that catcalling and approaching a lady in a not so nice manner is the same thing as killing someone, taking their life, murdering them because of their gender, or murdering them because of their ethnicity? Are we equating the two on the same level? Because that's the purpose of that designation of hate crime. A hate crime is something very egregious and heinous. The level of difficulties that are associated with hate crimes far exceed or far extend those that refer to catcalling or things of that sort. Now, of course, as believers in positive masculinity, we don't condone any of those activities, but we're saying, are they on the same level? If they've already been addressed in law, why push them over into hate crime? Let's keep going.
These are crimes anyway. Some of them anyway are crimes. So what is the point of defining it as a hate crime?
Well, there's 2 main reasons. One is to gather more information. So the reason that Nottinghamshire decided to do this is because they recognised there was a real problem with underreporting. And indeed, it was very interesting when they launched this initiative a couple of years ago to see some of the way the media treated it. You know, wolf whistling is going to be made a crime now, as if it's okay for the young woman who was walking to work the same route every day for a month and got harassed and intimidated on her way to work, as if somehow that's something which is acceptable in the 21st century. So this isn't about making a new crime. It's activities that are already crimes, but you have that hate crime definition, which helps the information gathering. It also encourages reporting, and it means that the police can have more intelligence about where this is happening, when it increases, what they can do about it, and ultimately it can also have an impact on sentencing too. And this is already recognised, as I say, for other issues like crimes of anti-Semitism, religious, race crime being seen as hate crimes. And I just think it's strange that one of the largest areas where this happens is in the way in which women are treated. We know there's a real problem with violence against women, and at this end, there's just a lack of confidence that women have that this will be taken seriously.
Okay. So Ms. Winston is making another point I think that is valid in its own right. But I don't think that, as she mentioned, anti-Semitism, things on a because let's just be forthright about this situation. When you mention the word anti-Semitic or anti-Semitism, what sometimes comes to mind? Well, I'll tell you what comes to my mind. What comes to my mind is the brutal genocide of Jews in Nazi concentration camps. That's what comes to my mind when you say anti-Semitism. Now, as far as misogyny is concerned, where in our history has misogyny resulted in the brutal murders of thousands, maybe millions of individuals? When has misogyny created that kind of instability? Now, I'm not saying that misogyny doesn't exist, and I'm not saying that it doesn't play a part in society, because it absolutely does. There are some individuals, some men, who have this twisted view of the value of a woman. They have a twisted view of the value of the opposite sex. And so, to those individuals, I say that this is a situation that needs to be worked out, and it needs to be worked out with the utmost care and concern for those who are victims. But now, when you look at things from an overall view, is this the case with all men? Now, if this was the case with every man that you saw, then of course misogyny would be an issue that needed to be dealt with, and it needed to be dealt with much force. But I think what's going to happen in regards to the laws that govern the interactions between people is that if ever the balance is lost, there are going to be some individuals who suffer unnecessarily. So basically what I'm saying is, if laws against misogyny are put on the books, then it's going to result in more harm to men than these individuals are willing to admit to. And I think it's a bit delusional to think that you could establish laws for a certain group and it not affect the whole group at large. That doesn't make sense to me. Maybe it does to them, maybe it does to you. But let's keep going.
And just because you mentioned wolf whistling, do you think that is a hate crime?
Well, I think when someone is being intimidated, then it is. I mean, the Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire, I think, summed it up very well when she said, you know, there's a big difference between somebody saying, can I buy you a drink, and somebody shouting at you, do you want some cock? Now, I apologise for using that language on, you know, a programme at this time in the morning, but that's the point. If it's not something which would be acceptable to say on your show, why is it acceptable to shout that at a 15-year-old girl on her way to school? It's not.
Let's talk about some more examples. I mean, let me see what you all think about these. Looking up a woman's skirt, do you think that should be a hate crime?
Well, we've certainly reported last week that upskirting should be made legal, specifically. Published a big law review report last week which highlighted all of these areas.
So it's already a crime in Scotland, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, we need to extend that across the rest of the country. I think all of these are examples, as Joe says, of things that women experience every day. And because we experience them every day, we haven't counted it as a hate crime. And that just doesn't make any sense. When you step back and look at it, as we have done across the whole of our legal system, you realise the scale of what we're talking about. Violence against women and girls is endemic, and we have to get to the foundation stone of it, and that's misogyny.
Some say, of course, violence against women and girls is so serious. Actually, this detracts from rape, domestic abuse, coercive control.
It doesn't, and all the campaigners, I mean, Joe and others in Parliament, for example, who are strong campaigners on those issues, are supporting what we're saying here. They're backing us up. It's all part of the same picture, and we have to start taking it seriously.
Let me bring in yourself, Paul, from the National Police Chiefs Council. Do you know if people are actually coming forward to report cases of misogyny as a hate crime in Nottingham?
So the issue of hate crime, we've had our shared definition of hate crime since 2007. And we consulted on whether certain types of misogyny should be included. There were people who argued that all domestic violence per se was gender-based hostility. And there was a consultation around at the time. And the sense taken then was that there wasn't necessarily a need to include it in the strategy because the commitment to dealing with sexual violence and domestic violence was so strong that actually it wasn't necessary. I think there's been a change in the extent of the ubiquitous misogynistic abuse online, suffered by almost everybody who's in the public eye would suffer that sort of abuse. And when we've seen racial attacks on MPs, we've seen misogyny as an integral part of the up to 20,000 offensive messages that were sent in the next day.
We've got legislation to cover that. We've got the Malicious Communications Act and so on.
So every hate crime is a crime anyway. So hate crime recognises the extra harm caused by targeted abuse. And our definition, really importantly, that's shared across the criminal justice system, has been shared by successive governments, is of monitored hate crime. And that says that these were the 5 strands that we decided in 2007 that we would monitor. It didn't say that other types don't exist. So our policy in 2014 is the police encouraged chief officers to understand what hostility existed in their area and what fear of crime existed in their area. And if they thought that hate crime policy would help them to deal with one of those things they identified, then they were encouraged to go ahead and do it. Nottinghamshire did that,
Okay.
and they...
So, and looking at the point that was just made by Mr. Paul, evidently the council that was set up didn't see the need to involve misogyny as a hate crime. And as was mentioned, it was not put into law as a hate crime or monitored as a hate crime because there was no substantial reporting of any incidents of misogyny in particular areas. And so you have chief officers that are over a specific territory, and those chief officers are given the responsibility to monitor and to see if any crime that happens in that area can be escalated to the point of it being a hate crime. And so up until this point, evidently, there has not been an instance where misogyny was reported on the level that would deem it necessary to be escalated to a hate crime. But now let's see, because he was referring back in to the time back in 2006. Let's see what he says further about the status of misogyny being a hate crime.
They've asked us to consider whether there is the next step should be taken to do this nationally, to measure and to address the issues that we've seen highlighted. And we're going through that process now of bringing the evidence, taking the reports that have been done, looking at the evidence given to the Home Affairs Select Committee and the Women Equality
So you haven't
Select
reached a
Committee.
conclusion yet about whether this should be rolled out across forces?
So my job currently is about pulling all the evidence, getting the views, and if I could, we've got a hate crime website, the True Vision, that is a police-owned website, and anyone who's got strong views on this, who's got constructive views on this, is more than welcome to get in touch with us to influence that debate. But we want to bring the best evidence to chief officers and all the opinions of relevant stakeholders to allow them to make a decision about whether that next step is to take Nottinghamshire's experience and bring that on a national footing.
Let me put this email to you from Alan. Joe Swinson. Misogyny must be tackled, but to be taken seriously, misandry must be given equal importance going forward. Hatred to men.
Well, it's interesting that North Yorkshire, I know, who have taken this approach, have said they'd be very happy if there were instances of misandry to record them also as hate crimes. My understanding of the figures that have been published to date have been that they have had misogyny reported in some instances, and they haven't yet had any reports of misandry. Look, I think, you know, if there are occasions where that is happening, then that's perfectly acceptable for that to be recorded. But I do think that it is important that we recognise that this problem of violence against women, you know, there is not an equivalence here. You know, when I speak to men about the experiences of sexual harassment, I mean, the shock that people have expressed about the Me Too movement, where men have said, well, I never knew that was going on. Well, that's because typically, you know, when you're walking down the road with a man, then they don't catcall you and, you know, leer offensive words at you. They don't do it in the presence of other men where they might be challenged, or so they perceive. So this is often quite invisible to men. And I think that invisibility of it is exactly the reason why we need to gather the information so that you can show the extent of the problem. And I think that, you know, from the evidence that currently exists, the evidence is that there is much more of a problem of a gendered approach to violence against women that is endemic in society.
Taking that
So
into account.
basically, I'm going to totally dismiss the concept of misandry. See, this is what I mean. If there is not a balance that's struck and maintained, then you begin to favor one side over the other. And in so doing, you lose balance, and it causes disruption, it causes difficulty. So the gentleman who emailed the show was simply suggesting something that's quite logical. If there is going to be investigation, if there's going to be fact-finding, if there's going to be an accumulation of data that's used to see whether or not misogyny needs to be escalated to a hate crime, then that same procedure would have to be done in regards to misandry so as to see if it needs to be escalated to a hate crime. Now, the results of the investigation, the fact finding, the gathering of data may be different when it comes to misogyny and misandry as far as the results. One may be escalated to a hate crime, one may not. But the gentleman is simply proposing equality of opportunity. So we're going to look into misogyny. At the same time, it would be feasible to ask that they also look into misandry. But because of the prevalence, according to Ms. Winston, because of the prevalence of misogyny, then it would be more of a focus than anything else. And I think that's a bit disingenuous, because now on the panel, everyone that's on the panel is interested in equal rights. Equal rights. But why does it seem like the equal rights that they're interested in only applies to one gender and not both genders? If we're talking about equality, then the same thing that would happen on both sides. Maybe it's just me. Let's keep going.
How? Let's agree with that. Sam, let me ask you, Sam Smethers from the Fawcett Society. Again, Jamie says the same thing. Although I agree that misogyny should be classed as a hate crime, I feel it's important to make it also apply for men. It shouldn't be a one-way street because some men are also victimised by women.
I think we looked at this in our review and we considered it and discussed it. And what we concluded was that given the huge power imbalance that there is in society and given the scale of violence against women and girls, you're not dealing with an equivalent situation.
No. I'm saying I'm accepting that there isn't an equivalence, but should there not also be misandry recorded as a hate crime when on the occasion that it happens?
I think it would need to be part of a consultation. I think, we'd be open to that.
But in principle?
Well, I think you just aren't dealing with the same thing. So I think, as Joe says, it clearly will happen in certain, small minority of cases, but we just do not see it on the same scale. And so we have to focus on what the nature of the problem is, and it's misogyny that's the problem.
Okay. Once again, you have another email. And do you get the sense that, as I mentioned, things are completely off balance here? Do you get the sense that this is a one-way conversation and that the individuals that are involved are unwilling to see it any other way but the way that they feel? So, you have crimes and violence against women. And that's something that anyone can readily admit. And so they're fighting against the notion that the crimes against women should be things that are swept under the rug. They're saying that those things should be brought out to the forefront, so much so that they need to be instituted as a hate crime. But let me ask a question, and I think this is relative to the conversation that we're having. Which one do you think is swept under the rug more? Do you think it's women undergoing violence because of their gender, or men? Who is more likely to report, men or women? Who is more likely to be taken serious, men or women? So if we're going to talk about equality, if we're going to talk about all things being equal, then misandry has to be brought into the conversation in order to balance it. Now, it could very well be that misandry is not something that can be elevated to a hate crime, but at least in principle, it needs to be added to this conversation. And I hadn't heard anyone yet, except for the host of the show, take misandry as something seriously. It's dismissed because, according to the last lady that spoke, the problem is misogyny. The problem is not misandry. But see, that's a subjective argument. That's a subjective argument. If you're saying that misogyny is the problem, then you're also saying openly that there is no difficulty with men suffering violence perpetrated on them by women. Now, is that a logical conclusion to come to? I don't think so. Let's keep going.
Just add, sexual orientation hate crime would cover heterosexuals being attacked by gay men. We don't experience it as a problem, but the law applies to it. the laws are applied on a human rights footing, and this is about all of our rights to be free to live our lives, free from targeted abuse. And sometimes we have to do more for people who are more affected by hate crime, more susceptible or more targeted. So one of the issues about the consultation will be that issue about should it be gender or sex, or should it be misogyny. Either way, this is about human rights. It's about a right for everybody to live their life with equal protection.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you for.
So now Mr. Paul came in and cleared that up for us very well. And I'm thankful at this point that someone was able to bring a bit of balance back to the conversation. So the efforts of the fact finding and information gathering will be to see that everyone, not just women, because now that has been emphasized thoroughly during the discussion, but it's not just women. When we're talking about equal rights, equal protections, then that should extend to both men and women. So misogyny as well as misandry would have to be brought into the conversation. Because if you're going to provide protections and you're going to provide certain laws that would facilitate safety in certain areas, then that needs to be for everyone, not just for a particular group, but for everyone. Now, it may, in the end, affect more in a particular group, but the ability to make a law, to bring about laws that are set in stone, those laws need to be beneficial to everyone. And so if ever there's an instance of misandry, then a man should feel comfortable with coming in and reporting, and then seeing that that situation is taken seriously, just as much as a woman would when it comes to misogyny. Let's keep going. Let's finish it out.
Very much coming on the program. Thank you. Next, a former.
Okay, so now that's the end of the video. So now, what are my final remarks? In our society, misogyny cannot be denied. It cannot. The violence against women based upon their gender is something that is prevalent. And it's prevalent because there are those of us as men who do not value women in general. There are those of us whose their activities toward women, their opinions toward women, in my opinion, are quite repugnant. These individuals behave as if there are no valuable women in their midst, and that has led to this particular difficulty that we're discussing in this video. A lack of appreciation. And so the thought about misogyny becoming a law or being put into law as a hate crime, although I am not in agreement, though I'm not political in the least, I can see that this will cause difficulty, because if an individual is aware of these particular laws, then don't you think that some people are going to be nefarious and use these laws even in situations that they do not apply? We've seen it before. Is it such a stretch of the imagination to believe that individuals are capable of filing false police reports? They're capable of calling the police and blaming their spouse for abuse, but then in footage that's later brought to the fore, you can see these individuals doing harm to themselves and then placing the blame on their spouse. Now that's been recorded, that's been seen several times. So why are we under the impression that if we make misogyny into a hate crime, that it won't be misused? Now, if there are laws that are already on the books that govern particular behaviors, then why is that not enough? Because I'll tell you what I feel. I'll tell you, and really I should say what I think. Because as we do here, we put emotion to the side and just look at things logically. What I think is that this pursuit to eradicate misogyny has really turned into a pursuit to eradicate masculinity. Because there are individuals who don't have a thought about treating their counterparts in a disrespectful way. There are men who go about their lives, as a matter of fact, with great care and concern for their female counterparts around them. They're gentlemen. They are trained from the youth up to see women as valuable, and if ever they're in trouble, to be the first one to lend a hand in things that are beyond their scope or beyond their ability to bring a resolution to. So what about those gentlemen? Are they being taken into consideration in these proceedings and discussions like this? Because if there's a prevalence of misogyny, which I agree there is, then there is the possibility that later on this could evolve into an out and out distrust, dislike, prejudice against men. Did you get the feeling that there was any concern about men on the panel today? Did you get the feeling that they were concerned about the rights of men? What about the horrible divorce laws that govern our society? What about the fact that usually during court proceedings with child support, individuals who happen to be men are consistently being put under some burdensome payments that they have to come up with each month? What about those things? What about the rights of men in those situations? Have those been looked at? Have they been discussed? Or is this simply another manifestation of the hatred of men? This is a difficult subject to discuss, because if you're not careful, then emotions will erode the situation and it will take logic out. But if we hadn't seen anything else from the video, we've seen that there has to be an equivalence with misogyny and misandry. And through fact finding, through gathering data, through looking at both from an objective standpoint, then you can see which one needs to be elevated, if either one needs to be elevated to the rank of hate crime. So I hope that you enjoyed this discussion. As always, we're pushing for positive masculinity. We're pushing for the rights of men, and we'll continue to do that because this is what this platform is all about. As always, I thank you for joining us. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Be easy.